kind of moving towards a little bit more abstraction in its own way. I'm playing with it a little bit more, separating out the abstraction from the actual piece instead of just having it a little bit more intertwined. So if you look at some of my pieces on the other side, for example, some of the 2007 pieces, you'll see there, Lyric Age. So there's a lot of abstraction, but it's more intertwined in the piece, like there's less of a division between the abstraction and the actual picture than there is like, here's not so abstract, here's abstract. That's partially because I keep moving into these different areas where I'm very interested in seeing the layers that come together and kind of teasing apart and making space, more space between the layers. That's something I'm very interested in exploring. And it's also just because I have a real love for abstraction. I think that there's something really wonderful and just very primordial about it. There's something that is a great unknown. It causes this feeling and this interaction, but you don't necessarily, can't put words to it and say, well, that's because it's an eye or something like that. So I really like that quality of it. I've also been doing quite a bit more black and white, trying to get back into the tradition to kind of get a better grounding again before I move back into color. And you'll see that quite a bit. So here we have a piece that is just a couple of years back, which is probably, you can kind of see some of the roots of some of the marks that I'm making that are a little bit more abstract and off the side. And this was Jesse, who's a model who used to be with us. And I just really, I mean, this piece to me was a breakthrough. It was very laborious, actually. I remember this one. And it just kind of, the feeling that I got afterwards that was there about it, I actually titled it like Around the Corner is the Self I Lost, because for me it was hard. It just feels like there's so many mixed emotions. Like, is it a loss? Is that why he looks that way? Or is it because there's a longing? Or is it because there's deception? Or is it some sort of like looking back, like you've lost something and you want something back? And that just was something that kind of resonated with me in terms of like the mood and the genre that was going on here. But as you'll see with most of my pieces, there's this kind of theme about authenticity of them kind of being themselves and each being individuals and having their own voice. So Jesse here is definitely somebody who started some of the later pieces and genres of the marks that you can see behind you that are a little bit more distinctive and abstracted, overlaid on top of the face. This was coming out of a period in which I did a lot of charcoal and vine work. It was a lot more just realism with like soft layers of abstraction that were kind of like less teased apart. So let's move on this way. This is a foray that I probably will return to, in which I was looking at, and you
Thanks for coming.
can tell from some of the pieces already. I draw at Michael Markowitz Studio, and in the same token, that fits in very well with the vein that I've been exploring since I was a child, which is calligraphy and Chinese brushstroke. So Chinese brushstroke has a very fluid feel to it. It's very loose. It's kind of like a watery medium, so it kind of moves a little bit more. And here you can see the translation between using the same kinds of techniques in charcoal to brushwork. So these are the paintings that are kind of in that genre of in between. I think I may be returning there. Let's see. So the pieces behind me here, and we can always guess who the models are. You can have a little lottery there because they are recurring models that I've drawn. Actually, there's something really I think is very nice about the show, which is not only that it's a retrospective, but that this is formed from drawing somebody over 6-7 years. You know, these are life models. They're exquisite models. They are so good at what they do. They're so inspiring. These people who are modeling at our studio really give us 150%. They don't just sit there and look forward. And that's so important because it's those kind of movements, feeling what is going on in that moment, that really informs the pieces. Now, a lot of this is what you see is the final result, so you can't see a lot of the process that goes behind it, but some of these faces actually have quite interesting histories that you wouldn't know about. Some of the faces are actually superimposed on one another, so I've kind of gotten into a new habit where I'm very interested in how this works. So I'm very interested in like cultural processes and how people kind of relate to one another and seeing how that interaction goes. And so what I've started doing is I'll start with a face, And because I'm looking for authenticity and them being individualistic, if I don't feel like they've quite gotten there, I continue to draw later from life, and then drawing later from life, I take a new face and I let that new face influence this face, almost kind of like a hybrid mixture, and seeing what that actually looks like. Obviously the pieces are a little bit playful, they're a little bit mischievous in their own right, because I'm interested in knowing what rules are and what their influence is, but not so much in actually following them. So where should an eye go? What color should be here? Things that should be or shouldn't be. I try to let the mind part kind of not have as much say as the part that's instinctual and gut-based. So you see a lot of that in all of the pieces. And I'm an improv musician, so they're much more improvisational, and they kind of develop in their own right. So these are the ones that have become full songs, and the other ones are little, bits and pieces that are helping me develop these ideas throughout time. So I make about 6 to 12, but I make probably hundreds and hundreds, if not like 1,000 pieces every year. But it takes me about maybe 3 months or more to get to maybe some breakthroughs, which are very individualistic in their own style and kind of have their own language, their own poetry, and something that's kind of like a new species, I kind of like to think about it as. So I'm very interested in that process. Please let me know if you have any questions along the way. So that one is Yoshio right there, and there's actually one of the smallest pieces here. There's a very lovely, quiet Yoshio in the front. It's small in color, it's about this big. These here are these two are Dante's, and that one over there is also Dante's. And I think that just goes to show, there's an interesting process that can happen when we kind of have more freedom and liberty to explore ideas freely, rather than to follow what I already thought about. Because they're obviously the same person, yet I'm really interested in seeing who these new people are and having these people kind of emerge and develop. Okay, so let's move on. So here we have one of my favorite pieces. This is a very postmodernistic piece. It's called Deconstruction. And it was another breakthrough piece in terms of changing the genre of the way that I draw. I don't know exactly how it happened, and that's the magic of it. But for me, it was really about gaining a new understanding of textures. Textures and shadows and colors, and I don't know exactly what quite possessed me to make that mark that's like a lightning bolt, but it just so fits that piece. And I think a lot of these pieces are about walking into that mysterious zone of not knowing what you're doing, but then the piece is kind of telling you, like children, kind of like, what's that balance of finding the new, who they are, and not kind of superimposing upon that. So that's part of the process there. And this one I think is just kind of a great standout in the sense of the way that it is abstract. It's a lot more abstract than a lot of other things, and the use of color is not at all used for shading, not at all used for form in any way. And I like that, and I like how it's still informed with those minimalistic features. And I like how the face, it's almost like kind of a rocky terrain, and you're not quite sure what you're getting yourself into. We move along this way. This obviously is already informing a work that's later, with some of the bolder marks and the separation of the abstraction, and then following back into some themes of the earlier times with kind of more development of the visual features. These pieces over here, the 2007s, kind of go together with the green one. They're just very, very lyrical, and there's a lightness about them, and there's a peace about them. There was a space is probably of a surrender. And these pieces emerge from that space, being in that moment, and then just really, it's a very intimate thing of feeling the space, and then allowing yourself just to be and to see what's going to happen there. This is one of my favorite pieces too. I think that this one was a part of another series that was just all about deep surrender, and it's a very Buddhist notion about presence that is pretty much in the entire show, but I think in terms of like the feeling that it exudes is very much aligned with that. So very, very special to me. Again, you can see the abstraction moving in its own way here. This is a tribute to Michael Markowitz. It's very Markowitzian. It was my first...
Markowitzian?
Yes.
I love it.
Hey, Michael, there's a new term, Markowitzian. We have to give him thanks. Well, it is. It's on the wall. So this was actually a wonderful piece in the sense that I just remember spending like a good hour just looking at lips and just spending and teasing. It was so spectacular to kind of draw the lips, and then every single successive move, it was like understanding a little bit more and seeing things that I didn't see before, feeling things that I hadn't felt before. And it was a really good process. And it started for me, obviously, as you'll see later, a love affair with lips. I really like to draw lips. So they may not be standing on their own, but it's just, there's a feeling in them that's just really, really, I really like it. And you'll probably see that love affair next to this up now, who has really, really pronounced lips that are very, very distinctive. Contradiction is a great kind of breakthrough piece too, because it kind of incorporated some of the things that I was doing earlier in terms of just some of the darker marks, but with the normal face. And then it became very musical. I don't know what possessed me. And in that moment, I picked up these colors and I thought, oh, I just need to do a little dab here. And those were the feelings I had. And so I think it's so good that it kind of broke through, like, where does that go? It doesn't even, it looks like it's actually like a glass. It's like put over the piece itself. But somehow they go very, very well together, and it makes a lot of sense for this particular piece. And I think that's the whole theme of the entire show, is about that authenticity, finding that individualism, which has been so deeply ingrained in American culture that I don't think that we realize it so much, but in other cultures there's just not such an emphasis on being so distinct, being so different. And that, you know, there's kind of an interesting thing that happens in this landscape. When you merge this one philosophy, that's one path of finding authenticity, which is being yourself. You know, what is it that you like? What is it that you don't like? Through consumerism, or through your habits, or through any of your social status, or your job. And then this very Buddhist notion of authenticity through non-being, non-identification, no identity. You know, you're not defined by anything, let alone your thoughts. So these pieces kind of play with authenticity from both ends, both exploring kind of how do you become your own person and not interfere with that, while being really kind of mischievous and saying, well, you know, I don't want to draw you the way you look necessarily. On the other hand, coming from a deep place of presence, so that you can really see which way the piece is moving and which way it wants to move. And I really love this piece too. It's very quiet, and it really reminds me of Yoshio, who was the model. He was a 85-year-old man, lovely man who modeled with us. And I think it just kind of has that feeling. It's kind of quiet and it's kind of reserved, and it kind of draws you inward. You know, he had lived a very long life, and I kind of like that reflexiveness. And I like that it's kind of, for me, a new perspective, because he was a very traditional model to these like very traditional poses that usually nobody can pull off. It looks really cheesy. But he did it really, really well. And I think for me it was kind of like, well, here's something that has this feeling of a presence that's kind of ageless, and yet there's this new freshness that's there, something that's coming out that's new. So Flower Child is also a recent piece, again, incorporating some of the things from 2007, some of more of the vine work that's more realistic up front, with a lot more of the abstract kind of marks that are going around. And her face just began. Most of the marks, I probably started with the eyes and then later on moved to the marks, but it just kind of naturally nestled where it was supposed to nestle. And she reminds me of some of my other more peaceful pieces, in which it was kind of that kind of innocence, surrender, and peace that was present at the time. Not What You Think, I think is a good title for this particular piece, which merges a lot of the things that you say, but without me telling you, may not know. I think for me it kind of also shows kind of this deep love affair that I've had with faces and makeup. because I've been a makeup artist for a really long time, and so one of her original names, because all of these had names before with the models' names for my own, identification, which is easier. And she used to be called Made Up, so that's a good reason for that. And I just really love the way that the colors and the lips, and that she's so outspoken, and yet it's almost like a death mask, because there's this kind of gray and black in it. It's almost like it's fake, and yet it's so vibrant, and she's so real, and it's like you can kind of feel her face. And I kind of like the way that she's looking, and she's kind of like, no, you have no idea. You don't know my history. You really don't know what this is about. So I think that really encapsulates a lot of things that I'm interested in exploring. This is a later piece, too, that was done this year. This was done over a series of about 3 hours with one model. And it was kind of like going to Las Vegas, because it was, drawing is a giant gamble. And the reason, and the pieces that you see, no, really, it is. I mean, I'm brutal. I cut things left and right. I make hundreds and hundreds of pieces. So what I mean by the Las Vegas thing is often when you start to have pieces that are interesting, you're no longer, like in life, willing to gamble it away and to do and follow your gut because you don't want to ruin it, or you don't want to do something that would jeopardize it. So you're walking that fine line where you want to push the boundaries, because for me, these pieces are about innovation. They're hybrids. They're about creating these almost like new people, new species. And for that to happen, there has to be a differentiation. And yet, you can't mix it with things that don't work, otherwise it falls apart. So this was like about a 3-hour gamble, because I was really loving so many things, and I knew the next move, if I made it, it could have just kind of all collapsed in front of me. But she's very reminiscent of some of the pieces I've done of Ami before. That's the model. That's kind of more serene and a little bit more peaceful and reflexive and contemplative. Emily in Black and White is from, and there's not as many pieces here that I've actually shown of this genre, but I have them, which are just a lot more, they're more realistic, but they're very, very intimate. They're very, very close up. They really allow you to kind of feel the face, the lips, the eyes. And I think that there's, and I was talking about this before, the beauty of vulnerability. And I think that these pieces, because they are faces, they're so large and they're close up and they're so unusual, they get us to look at things in a different way that I find very, very valuable. And I think that they get us to experience each other and people, like looking at our humanity in a different kind of way that we interrelate. And when I see a face like that, it's like kind of undeniable. There's nothing I can do but say, oh, she is human. There is something there. There is something collective that holds us together. I think that's something that I've always kind of held on to. This lost moment, I'm told by people that it's kind of sad. I actually don't find it sad. I think, yes, Dad? I actually think of it really as a deep... I think of it as this kind of deep love for the now, but it's almost bittersweet, because for me the lost moment is you're knowing that this moment can't last, but you wanting it to so badly, like whatever those moments are. You don't want the sun to go down, or you don't want to, say goodbye, or leave Paris, whatever it may be. And for me, it's more of a recognition of that kind of life is partially exquisite because it doesn't last. And there's a sad reckoning that has to be had with that, and yet it's so beautiful. That's what kind of makes it so spectacular. If we look over on this side of the wall, we have another piece of Yoshio. There's 3 pieces of Yoshio, I think, who is the older gentleman. And this is from an earlier time, so again, a lot more vine work and realism and those kinds of pieces, and then developing out of those. But I really love how it's very up close and it's very personal. I think that's very important. It's a topic that I think I'm very interested in because, fundamentally, the way that we interact as human beings really fundamentally distinguishes us from, almost any other species. The degree of variation. Always looking at me funny. I have respect for hands. I really love the communication. I do. I'm like, who is that? So I don't mean anything by that. But I think there's something really interesting in the fact that we have all these mental thoughts about things, and we reflect upon things, and we look at things in a certain light. So I think that it's really important to kind of come back, especially in this society where intimacy is kind of like a lost song. You know, very beautiful, but it's something that we kind of have just given away to. And don't get me wrong, I love Facebook. It's very useful. Probably most of you are here because of Facebook, you know. But it's not the same kind of interactions that we used to have. The speed. I think that's another issue with these pieces, is that I hope that it slows things down. I hope that it creates a space that's more contemplative. Because I feel like most of us, if we don't see things that are unusual enough, we just, oh, there's another text, oh, there's this, there's constant like mind chatter that makes you want to think more. And I hope that even though I want people to be reflective about things, that the pieces themselves actually hold a space that's deeply quiet, unintrusive, and contemplative and intimate, like it has some sort of relationship with you. This one is one of my favorite pieces. It is the Mystery of Being, which is the title of the show. I think that this one really just epitomizes this great mystery of life to me. That the best things, the best drawings, the best experiences are not explainable. They're not surmisable. You cannot define them. You think that you're supposed to finish everything, do everything, make things this way, go that way, blah, blah, blah. And in the end, that ends up usually ruining those pieces. And this piece I thought was really good because I stopped at the right time. I did the things that really deeply felt. And for me, it just feels like, wow, I mean, I'm so curious about this thing. Like, I want to reach in there. It's like this particle and then what sits on top of what. And I'm just so like, I'm so drawn by this piece. I love it. And that's Emily. I'm sorry it's not the most Vogue-like edition of Emily, but it is definitely, for me, one of my best favorites.
What do you say the title of the show again?
The Mystery of Being, and all the information is on the back wall, and in the bio. So, I'm not sitting this way. This one is not Faulkner-esque, but the title kind of reminds me of that. My mother's fish. For those of you who went to high school here in San Mateo, will remember that. This one I think is kind of interesting in the sense that it's picking together a lot of the things that I've done in terms of color earlier on, more saturation of color, progression of the abstractive marks, and also, again, kind of making things a little bit distorted. This actually I drew out of the distortion because I was really frustrated, actually. And so I was doing the eyes and it wasn't coming together for me. And then I did, instead of doing what I was supposed to do and make it look like him, I did obviously what I'm not supposed to do, which I often do, and I just made these lips gigantic. You can't tell as much because it's worked its way together. But these lips are much bigger than they're supposed to be. And that's kind of how it got its name. But that was another really great lesson in terms of really going with your gut and not just thinking like, oh no, that wouldn't fit, that wouldn't be right. So we're coming to one of my pieces that I think is my favorite, which is the exquisiteness of now. Really, this one reminds me of my mother. I think it's not because she looks like my mom, but it reminds me kind of the lost moment back there and the subject that we were talking about, which is, this very Buddhist philosophy, and yet if you're really vulnerable and you're really real, you really do feel that this moment is passing every moment. And this moment is kind of like, how do you make this moment eternal? For me, that's what this piece is. And that in that moment, I was so present, I was so there, like I felt everything, and that made everything, it made everything spectacular. I mean, it's like, I can't even describe it. And I love drawing the lips. It was a very long process. I think that just on the lips alone, I spent probably over an hour just drawing the lips. And I think also for me, this is a really important piece in terms of the breakthrough, in terms of some of the stylistic ideas that I've been working on in terms of the abstraction on the side, but also some of the body work and the more realistic nature. feature faces, because sometimes I often tend to shy away from that and not make it as realistic. So even though there's realism in the sense that there are eyes and there's a nose and there's a lip, it's very, very loose. And this one is much, much more close. Coming to it. Bye. Thank you so much for coming. Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much. Okay, I'll see you later. Okay, bye. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much again. Okay, so we're moving here to there somewhere. This is again something from 2007, a time where you can see I was very attuned involved with colors. I did a lot of full saturation pieces at that time, and kind of starting to explore some of the ideas of abstraction, although a little bit more loosely at that time. But again, really concentrating on those facial features that are really interesting and starting to tease apart the layers and to kind of get a better understanding of how those things are kind of moving along in the face and kind of creating those new landscapes that are happening. This one right here, particularly is one of the few figures that I draw. I don't draw a lot of figures, though actually all of the pieces contain figures in them, but they've been incorporated into the face in an abstract manner. So in this particular piece, I like it in the sense that it's very essential. I feel like it's very instinctual. It reminds me a lot of some of the totems that I've seen in African art. This model was Chandri, and I just really like how things don't really quite fit into place, but she's just really there and owning herself. And her heritage, so I really like that element of that. Renaissance is kind of harking back to that time around 2007 and 2008 when I was working on a lot of issues of surrender and peace. And again, still working with the color, but you can see again some of the development already starting to happen with the marks. Instead of just being like overlay of color, that they're already starting to separate out from the image themselves and starting to move away from that kind of thing. So I think that is the whole show. That was a very lengthy talk, so I hope that was okay. If you guys have any questions, I'd love to take them, or comments, or food is also at the table if you don't want to stare at me anymore. Yes, comments, questions, favorites, hate it. No.
So you mainly do...
Oh, thank you. Yeah, you should. Okay, you can stop taking me notes. Stop. Yeah, the